Welcome to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. On this show, you'll receive tools for relational health that you can apply wherever you are on your journey in love. You'll learn how to anchor your security within you so you can co-create balanced, interdependent relationships that fill your cup. Let's get the love flowing. Becoming Secure in Love starts now. Hello. I'm Love Coach Mariya, and you're listening to Becoming Secure in Love on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Stick with me for the next hour for a healthy dose of heart-blowing awareness expansion. In every episode, we examine the challenges that love can present and explore the various ways to shift from push and pull to peace of mind. The topic of this episode is needs. They're natural, so how do we get them met? Well, I find it helps to start with an understanding that needs are conditional. That is to say, whatever is needed in order to something. And then you can kind of tie in the hierarchy, the Maslow's hierarchy, or just even the notion of a hierarchy as well. So like at the base, in order to live, we need food, shelter, water, air. And then we have other needs that are required in order for us to be well, and then other needs still in order for us to really thrive. So I mentioned in the last episode that about boundaries, that boundaries are not the same thing as needs, because boundaries are just the limits of our resources, and they don't require anything from other people. But needs are something that it is something that's required, right? So there's definitely some overlap and very much an intersection in the way that we communicate about them. And the most useful, beneficial, magical framework that I've encountered is devised by a man named Marshall Rosenberg, the late Marshall Rosenberg. He came up with a framework in the 60s and 70s, and he called it nonviolent communication. And it's not exactly what comes to mind. It was inspired by Gandhi's nonviolent movement. And it was based on the notion that judgmental and divisive thinking leads to dehumanization and the justification of violence. And so he crafted a framework of communicating from a worldview of the three pillars of nonviolent communication, also known as NVC, are non-judgment, empathy, and personal responsibility. And he presents this framework in a particular way, particularly focusing on feelings, needs, observations, and requests. And I have sort of come up with a 6-step process of sort of introducing and learning and developing these skills, but still based on the same premises. So the premises of NVC are that we all share from the same bucket of feelings, such as joy, sorrow, anger, the familiar feelings that we all experience, and that we also all share from the same bucket of needs, very core needs like belonging, physical safety, emotional safety, creative expression, beauty, community, order, all kinds of things. And in certain contexts, these needs can also be seen as values. But another premise here is that our feelings occur as reactions to our needs being met or unmet. So usually the positive feelings happen when our needs are met, and the negative feelings happen when our needs are unmet. He also clarifies that when you're discussing your feelings, when you're talking with a counterpart about your feelings in a particular situation, that we're really focusing on the emotions and not your perceptions or interpretations. So for example, it's very common, I still do it myself as well. It's very common to say, I feel like you're not listening to me. I feel like you're not hearing me, or even to say something like I'm feeling disrespected is not a feeling. Like the feeling would be, I'm feeling sad or hurt or frustrated. And to some extent, disrespected is sort of an interpretation. But you could say I'm feeling sad and maybe even angry that in this situation, my need for respect isn't being met. So I hope that kind of clarifies things a little bit. Furthermore, needs, like a final point in this framework, is that needs are not the same thing as strategies. And needs kind of have layers to them. Like I said before, there's the very base core survival needs, and then they kind of go up from there. And a lot of people consider things needs that are actually strategies for getting needs met. So maybe an obvious example might be something like, I need a dozen red roses on Valentine's Day. And if I don't have that, then that means you don't love me. Like that's what I need. Well, we do need to feel loved and appreciated and whatnot, but the roses are just, it's sort of a strategy for getting our needs met. And the beauty of this framework, as I'll get into it, is the way that we can start to get collaborative about getting our needs met when we kind of pare down beneath the strategies and get down to the core layer of what the needs are. So as I mentioned, I like to use like a 6-step process for like learning about and developing these skills. And the first one is self-empathy. So taking time to check in with yourself and learn how to sort of communicate with yourself about, gaining some clarity on what you're feeling and what you're needing in any particular instance. And you can practice anytime. You can even practice with positive experiences, like, wow, I'm feeling so happy right now. And then if you can even fine tune and get more granular with your language about the feelings, like, is this joy? Is this elation? Is this giddiness? Even getting into, just for your own practice, where it feels in your body. It can tie in an embodiment aspect as well. And then check in on, like, well, gosh, what is this? What needs are being met that I'm feeling so happy about this? And, maybe it's like, wow, this is really meeting my needs for excitement, or, being seen can be really joyful, or adventure. Maybe if you're traveling or something and you're feeling really excited, novelty is a pretty core need. So, and on a side note, it's funny, we definitely have a lot of paradoxical needs that coexist. Like, we need structure and stability, and at the same time, we also need spontaneity and variety. So it's important to find a balance and make sure that we're meeting the variety of needs that we have. And this practice of self-empathy is really beneficial for meeting our needs of validation and understanding. And I've touched on this before, but self-validation is so crucial to building an internally rooted security for yourself. And as I mentioned before, there are certain things that we do need external validation for. Sometimes, we have an idea that we're not sure if it makes sense, or maybe we think we're seeing something or hearing something and we're not sure that we're, getting it clearly. So we might want to kind of validate our perceptions or our ideas with other people. But when it comes to our internal experiences, we often make a very self-abandoning mistake of looking to others for validation of things like our worthiness, or our emotional experiences. Like, no one else can validate your emotional experiences. Those are personal. You're the only one experiencing them. So it sounds really like overly simple and not important or effective, but it's amazingly cathartic when you take the time to practice some self-empathy and just check in and acknowledge the things that you're feeling, again, positive or negative. When you're having an experience, an emotional experience, to take the time to say, wow, I'm feeling really angry right now, or I'm feeling just depleted. I'm feeling really sad. I've got some grief, whatever it is that being seen by yourself seems, like I said, it seems like it wouldn't do anything because you're already you, but it really is amazingly cathartic to take that time and give yourself some self-validation, meet that need for validation, meet that need for understanding, having your inner self experience yourself, seeing yourself like it's surprisingly powerful. And sometimes it can be helpful also to sort of separate yourself out a little bit, maybe have your adult self sit down and validate your inner child. It can be a really wonderfully therapeutic experience. So taking the time to self-validate and checking in with yourself, especially when you are in this sort of heated encounter with another person, if you can pause and give yourself that self-empathy before doing anything else, it will really ground you and help you clarify what you want to communicate. And later on in this process, we also practice empathy for others. And again, giving yourself that moment of self-empathy and the healing salve that is helps resource you for considering what the other person might be experiencing so that you can have a more collaborative communication. But before that, there's a few other steps and we'll get into them after a short break. You're listening to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. So when we come back, we'll take a look at the next step, which is non-judgment. When is judgment harmful and when is it helpful? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. You can find me at lovecoachmariya.com. And women looking for community around these topics are welcome to join my free Facebook group, Empowered Compassion. Before the break, we were discussing the foundations of communicating our needs, starting with self-empathy. And now we're going to take a look at the practice of non-judgment. When is judgment helpful and when is judgment harmful? I will say that this piece was a really big pill to swallow. When I was reading the book, Nonviolent Communication, the author talks about different kinds of judgment and advocates for one over the other. And again, because of the way that certain kinds of judgment can lead us to sort of divisive thinking and then dehumanization of the other, and then from there violence. So and even if it's, in thought or energy or act, the idea, the first way to sort of break it down is objective versus subjective. And he talks, I think Rosenberg talks about it as moral judgment versus value judgments. But I find it cleaner to think of it in terms of objective versus subjective. So having an objective morality means that what you consider the determinant of good and bad or right or wrong is externally based. So something outside of you determines what's good and bad. And a subjective framework of judgment means that things are either good for you or bad for you, not necessarily objective. So let me give some examples. Well, in fact, an easy way to think of it is like fact versus opinion. So a common way this might come about is maybe I come out of a movie and I say that movie was horrible. That it's sort of stated as a fact, and it's stated on this notion that that there's some basis for judging movies that is external, that is, it's a decree that this movie did not meet the universal standards of a good and a bad movie, and so therefore I deem this movie horrible. From a subjective framework, we would say something more like, I didn't like that movie. And then tying in NBC as well, we can even relate it to the needs. Like, I didn't like that movie. It didn't meet my needs for entertainment and escape. Maybe it was too realistic for me. Maybe I like a bit more fantasy. And then, when you encounter someone else with a different set of needs or their values, the way that they sort of prioritize their values, you might say, oh, well, if you like that kind of movie, you might enjoy that movie. Whereas coming from that was a horrible movie, then that means that if you liked it, there's something wrong with you. That movie was horrible. Why would you like that? What's wrong with you? Instead of, I didn't like it, you might. Great. Another example I like to give is like food, for example. So if I were to eat a mushroom and chew it in my mouth, and I'm talking about the kind of bland brown ones, like chanterelles are fantastic, especially sauteed in some butter. But if I were to eat like a standard brown mushroom, I would have the experience in my mouth that was very unpleasurable. And I would say, I do not like these at all. But from an objective perspective, I might spit it out and say, ew, what is this vile demon spawn in my mouth? Get it away. It's a horrible thing. It should be banished from the face of the earth. There should be no more mushrooms anywhere ever. They're horrible. Get rid of them all. They're evil, vile things. So I hope this is illustrating a little bit what I'm talking about, objective versus subjective. Objective is placing the morality, the basis, the judgment in something outside of you, and subjective is owning it and saying, like, this is my opinion. This doesn't work for me. It might work for you. Now, the problem with judgment in general is that it's an operating system. So if you are judging others as good or bad, you're also judging yourself, because not necessarily in that moment, but if your mind is operating on judgment, you're running around all the time judging things as good or bad. You're judging things outside of you as good or bad. You're judging yourself as good or bad. You're judging the things that you do as good or bad. And at some point, you're going to end up in a puddle of shame. Not because you're judging other things. It's not like you're going to feel shame about judging. It's just that eventually on that operating system, you're going to make judgments of yourself that you'll become deeply shamed about. And shame is such a debilitating experience that it's just not productive. So what I like to do actually, so my first shift was letting go of objective morality. And by the way, I will say on a side note that I'm not here to debate whether or not there is an objective morality. I'm here to advocate for letting go of using it as a framework. I don't think that it's beneficial to individuals or to cultures. I think that objective moralities have resulted in a horrendous amount of pain and suffering and violence and death. So personally, I advocate for more subjective moralities. And then, so after the process of, kind of letting go of an objective morality and shifting more into a subjective morality, I came to find that it was even more beneficial to me to kind of let go of even good or bad. So instead of like, this is good for me or this is bad for me, because the reason I started shifting out of that is I would notice often me judging my own behaviors as bad for me, and that was still kind of inflicting some harm upon myself. And so I've shifted to a much more neutral concept of judgment, where I'm really just assessing things in terms of their alignment with my values and goals. So either something is aligned or it isn't aligned. And that's simple. It's just feedback. If I notice that something's not aligned, it's just, oh, okay, well, that's not aligned for me. I'm going to shift to something that's more aligned. And there's much less of that judgmental weight on me when I do that. A couple other side notes about judgment. First of all, as a word, there are different kinds of judgment. Sometimes you're judging whether or not you can make a left turn, or you're judging how far your money is going to last till your next paycheck or whatnot. So there are synonyms for different kinds of judgment as well. I kind of try and use those as appropriate. So sometimes you're instead of judgment, you're discerning, or you're assessing, or there's another one I can't think of, but there are different kinds of judgment. And just to be clear, when I'm talking about judgment or non-judgment, I'm talking mostly about perceiving things as good or bad. And also, even when I talk about right and wrong, obviously in like mathematical terms, some things just are factually right or wrong. But even that can be much blurrier than some people like to think. And the more that like the quantum physicists dive into things, the blurrier that stuff gets too. So I'm not going to dive into that right now. But another note about judgment is I also try and focus on behaviors instead of people. And especially when it comes to labels, I don't think that name calling is beneficial. People like to throw names and labels around all the time. And I understand that, the way our brains work, it can be a very helpful shortcut. But again, I try and focus on behaviors, not people. And I try and shift my language to the focus on behaviors. So, instead of that person is a self-righteous asshole, I might say that behavior, that specific behavior that person just did, seems to be coming from a place of righteousness. So things like that. Again, when it comes to the way that I view myself, it helps as well for me to focus on my behaviors instead of me as a person. And, that's coming back to shame. That's a big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, sort of feeling remorse about what you did. And shame is like, instead of thinking I did a bad thing, you're thinking I am a bad person. And so it's another reason that focusing on behaviors instead of people can be helpful. And further along, a side note along that note is when it comes to advocacy, I do want to say, to clarify that I'm not advocating for, sort of a passive stance of like, oh, well, that's not for me, but if you want to do it, that's fine. In terms of maybe something like, one example, something I'm opposed to is dogfighting rings, for example. I don't think that they're not aligned with my values and goals. So I would not really tolerate them. If I knew of one nearby me, like in my community, I might take steps to shut it down, but I would never condemn the people. It would be the behavior. And I think that it's really important when we're advocating for things that we believe in, that we focus on the behaviors and the systems that we want to take down and not condemn the people. because we're all humans and we all deserve love. And when we believe that, then we believe that we are deserving of love too. So this practice of non-judgment is really helpful, tying back into how it meets our needs. It helps us meet our needs for order and integrity and compassion. And it helps us with our own self-love and self-compassion also to practice non-judgment. So that's step 2. Now, step 3, I've already spoken a lot about, and it's regarding personal responsibility. I'm going to come back to that in our next segment after a short break. So you're listening to Becoming Secure in Love, from Push and Pull to Peace of Mind with me, Love Coach Mariya. And we've been exploring ways to communicate about our needs, starting with self-empathy and getting into non-judgment. And when we come back, we'll take a look at personal responsibility and the other steps. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Becoming Secure in Love, from Push and Pull to Peace of Mind with me, Love Coach Mariya. You can find me at lovecoach.mariya.com. And women looking for support on their journeys of becoming secure in love are welcome to reach out for a free introductory coaching call. Before the break, we were discussing non-judgment, and in the context of communicating about our needs and non-judgment as sort of a pillar of self-love and empathy. And the reason that it's such a crucial pillar for communicating our needs is because when we come from a place of judgment and criticism and blame, it just puts the other person in a state of defense, and we're much less likely to get our needs met in that case. So, even aside from any sort of morality about it, just kind of on purely functional terms, it's not a very productive practice. So for that, among other reasons, non-judgment is an important piece of getting our needs met. Now, the next step 3 in my process of getting needs met in a collaborative way is personal responsibility. And I've spoken about this before. It's definitely a keystone in my own framework, and I'm a pretty strong advocate for it. Last episode, I talked a lot about misplaced responsibility and the victim mindset and the drama triangle, and how we often hold other people responsible for ourselves and our experiences, and hold ourselves responsible for other people's experiences instead of just having everybody be responsible for themselves. And when you combine personal responsibility with interpersonal accountability, you get interdependent synergy. So, of course, the first step is personal responsibility. And in terms of communicating about our needs, it has to do with owning your feelings and your needs. So when something comes up, the experience that you're having, it's communicating it isn't about blaming the other person. You take ownership and provide an opportunity for the other person to learn how to connect with you. And if they care about you, they want to help you get your needs met. It's just a matter of approach. And so let's say the dishes are dirty on the sink, and I've asked countless times to please rinse them and put them in the dishwasher immediately. And you see the dishes on the sink and you're like, there's a pile of dirty dishes and you guys are making me crazy. People are probably just going to get defensive about that. So if instead you say, hey, I see that there are, a few dishes sitting on the counter, and I'm feeling aggravated and frustrated and honestly a bit hurt because this is not meeting my need for consideration, respect, order, even physical safety to some extent. Because, last week I tried to cook something and there was a small kitchen fire because the pan wasn't cleaned properly. So just when you state something, even as simple as, maybe someone's late and you say, I'm feeling a bit sad because this, you arriving later than the time we had agreed upon isn't meeting my need for consideration, respect, love, whatnot. You're owning your experience and you're just sharing it with the other person, like communicating to them about it. And you're not really saying like it's your fault. You're just explaining kind of cause and effect. And when we take that ownership, we also take note of the fact that each person, like I said before, when we all share from the same bucket of needs, we all have a very particular way that we prioritize those needs, though. And it's different in different situations as well. Maybe most often when you're driving, you're prioritizing safety, but if your friend is bleeding out in the back seat, you might be prioritizing speed and efficiency to like get them to the hospital. So you might not be driving as safely. Or maybe you're running late for a really important interview and that's more important to you at that moment than safety. So the way that things get prioritized are different, and the sort of framework for how we prioritize our needs is pretty unique to each person, and it's based on our individual backgrounds. And so taking ownership of that, it's actually very empowering to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling, and it's because these needs aren't being met in this situation. And it helps you also gain clarity. So circling back to what each of these things meets for us, this practice meets our needs for clarity, autonomy, and growth, because then we can see, okay, these are my needs that aren't getting met in this situation. These are the needs that I need to focus on and make sure that I'm employing the strategies that will help me get these needs met. And again, when you're communicating it with ownership, you're so much less likely to get the other person in a state of defensiveness, which is really counterproductive. So the next step kind of ties into this, and it's objective observation. And when let's say you're in college and you have a roommate and they've got a friend over and they're listening to music, and it's a school night and you have to get up early and you can't sleep because they've got the music up too loud. If you come out and you say, hey, look, the music's really loud, I can't sleep, they might be like, no, it's not, because loud is actually kind of subjective. So if you were to instead say, I see that the volume is at level 18, and at that level with the door closed and my earplugs in, I can still hear it and I'm not able to sleep. And so when you state the situation that you're responding to in an objective way that's just based on very factual observation, like, you want to state things that a robot would state. Like if a robot were to come into this situation and analyze what's going on, they would say, yes, the volume is at 18, the door is closed, just things that are very factual. What we tend to do is include interpretations and assumptions, and we use very, subjective language, like, the kitchen's filthy, there's loads of dishes. Well, okay, the kitchen is largely clean, actually, and there are 5 exactly dishes. Some people might consider that a lot. Some people might consider that nothing. So again, sticking with factual observation is also going to help create more space instead of create debate and defensiveness. Another thing that's really good for the objective observation is practicing tying back into self-empathy. So when you're noticing things that are happening in your body, emotional experiences that you're having, the more factual you can be about it, the less interpretive, the less you let your ego's love for story weave a whole bunch of meaning into things. Um, the more easy it is to sort of process things, to analyze and assess them and process them and move through them. And that, the practice of objective observation meets our needs for clarity and order. Now, the fifth step is empathy for the other. What are they feeling and needing? What are the strategies that they're implementing in this, instance, and, to meet their needs? What needs are they meeting right now? If you've got your roommates listening to music, they're probably enjoying some company and creative expression. And so taking that time to, again, check in with yourself first. All right, what am I feeling and needing right here, right now? That'll help ground you and give you some, loving validation and understanding. And then it resources you a bit better to then consider what the other person is experiencing. And at the same time, it can also help you when, not necessarily when you're the one who's upset. Maybe you're fine and someone comes to you upset. Sometimes that will create some upset in you, and then you can be like, whoa, I'm feeling kind of attacked right now or something. And it's like, okay, well, that's me. Check. What are they feeling and needing right now? And then we can, practice that empathy for them and help them feel seen and heard and validated. And just, we can check our assumptions, like, gosh, it sounds like you're really angry right now. Is that how you're feeling? And they might be like, yeah. Or like, no, I'm actually really surprised mostly. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, I'm guessing maybe, this situation then maybe isn't meeting your needs for X, Y, or Z. And they might be like, yeah, that's totally it. Or they might be like, no, I think it's more like, it's not that, it's this. It's like, oh, okay. And you can kind of help them figure out what they're feeling and needing, and can really diffuse a situation. And again, this is part of why Marshall Rosenberg calls it nonviolent communication. He was a huge advocate of it for like world peace. I mean, he participated in a lot of large political conflicts and like helped facilitate some mediations really successfully. So the practice of other empathy meets our needs for nurturing and contribution and connection. So after a quick break, we're actually going to tie all of this together for the final piece of effectively communicating our needs and collaborating to get them met. You're listening to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. We've been exploring personal responsibility, objective observation, and empathy for others. And when we come back, we'll discover how to make a request that leads to win-win solutions. Do you know how to collaborate with others to get your needs met? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. You can find me at lovecoachmariya.com. And women looking for support in their daily practice of strengthening awareness and self-mastery are welcome to book a call with me to apply for the virtual ashram I facilitate called Peaceful Power Practice. Before the break, we were discussing tools for communicating our needs, and we were just about to get into making requests. Do you know how to collaborate with others to get your needs met? So in order to make a request to get your needs met effectively, you want to combine all of these tools that we've been discussing, starting with self-empathy. You check in with yourself, take a inventory of what you're feeling and what you're needing. And then you make sure that you're incorporating non-judgment. You're not accusing yourself of being a bad person. You're not like arming up with some name calling for your counterpart. And you make sure that you are taking ownership of your feelings and your needs. And then you check to make sure that the observations that you're making of the situation are objective and factual. And then you take a moment to consider what the other person is feeling and needing. Practice some empathy with them. And we tie it all together, and we might have a situation like, again, you're in college, you've got your roommate has a friend over and they're listening to music, and you're trying to sleep because you have a test in the morning. And you could come out of your room and be like, oh, it's loud. It's so loud and it's late. What the heck are you guys doing? Can't sleep. Get out of here. And then they might get really mad or just turn the volume up and tell you to deal with it. Or you could say, hey guys, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun. That's awesome. I actually have to take a test in the morning. And as it turns out, with the volume at this level, even with my earplugs in and my door closed, I can't sleep. There's actually a live show down the street. Would you guys maybe be willing to go check that out? Or if you're really into the music that you're listening to, I have a headphone splitter. So you guys can borrow my headphones and the splitter, and you guys can both listen on headphones. And if you could maybe keep it down, that would be great. And that's not necessarily the full formula of coming out with saying, hi, I'm feeling a bit sad and frustrated, and my needs for respect and rest aren't really being met in this situation with the volume at that level. I imagine that, this is meeting your needs for creative expression and connection, but, would you be willing to, take this little party elsewhere so that I can get some sleep and you guys continue having fun? That would be the more sort of technical way to do it. But as long as you're hitting all of the things in your mind, you're probably still going to be able to communicate what you need in a way that's beneficial. In a more intimate situation, maybe if it's with your partner and we're talking about some things that are a bit more vulnerable, then you do want to be a bit more explicit in the feelings that you're experiencing and the needs that that you're trying to get met. And again, it is still helpful though to make sure you're incorporating empathy for both parties. And sometimes what you'll find too is that both people are struggling in a particular situation to get their needs met. One person maybe wants some space and the other person wants some closeness. And so when you're coming on something that seems irreconcilable, the more you pare down to the core needs involved, as long as both parties are willing to, be somewhat flexible, you can find different strategies for getting your needs met. I think that one of the most detrimental things we do to ourselves and our relationships is get overly attached to specific strategies. One pretty obvious answer to that, one thing that we do a lot is we try to get like all of our social needs met by our partner, by that one person. And when I say social needs, I mean it in like a kind of anthropological sense, like the needs that we have that require other people. There are ways to get our needs met that involve other people that don't have to come from the person closest to us. And sometimes there's even needs like connection can be met with ourselves. Like taking time to connect with yourself is sometimes more powerful than any connection you can get with anyone else. Sometimes some of the most fulfilling connection I receive is by something called forest bathing, to go out in some nature that I consider very beautiful. Granted, I mean, not all nature fulfills that for me. Like, I'm not really into beaches, surprisingly. I've really recently come to terms with. Or deserts. I'm not really super into deserts, but like the jungle-y or like thick forests, like, oh, that just really, really fills me up. So the point is, if you're feeling a need for connection and your person needs some space, like consider other ways you might get those needs met. So again, paring down to the core is a really helpful way to, especially if both people, if you're having a conversation and you're paring it down to the core needs involved, then you guys can collaborate to come up with strategies for both of you guys to get your needs met. And it might not be in the ways that you were, initially imagining. So a bit of openness is also a bit of a prerequisite here, I suppose. And I'm especially fond of the phrase, would you be willing? Like this, this is what's going on here. Would you be willing to try this? And they might say no. So it's really important not to have any demands and not be too attached to their response, and just be open to collaborating. This type of stuff, like I said, can really lead to world peace as well. It can help us have better relationships with ourselves, which gives us a foundation to have better relationships with the people in our lives. And we can also apply it to the way that we interact with everybody. So I'm a huge fan. If you haven't read Nonviolent Communication, I recommend it. It's an excellent book. And with that, I find that it's really helpful to furthering my mission of empowering compassion. And as we wrap this up, just invite you to consider what's one way that you could empower your compassion. As a reminder, I can be found at Love Coach Mariya, spelled MARIYA.com. I lead a free online community for women navigating the challenges of insecure relationships in the Facebook group Empowered Compassion. I also facilitate a virtual ashram for women working diligently to build the foundations of an authentically aligned life and a balanced interdependent relationship. And that's called Peaceful Power Practice. And you can ask me about enrollment. And my standing offer is one-on-one coaching for women seeking guidance and tools for relational health. The first call is always on me. Reach out anytime via Facebook, my website, or email me at connect@lovecoachmariya.com. And with that, my friends, I bring this exploration to a close. I hope you'll join me again. On the next episode, I'll be unpacking love versus attachment. What's in it for whom? I'm looking forward to exploring these heart-centered topics with you. I'm Love Coach Mariya, and you are loved.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Secure in Love, from push and pull to peace of mind, with me, Love Coach Mariya. Tune in every second and fourth Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com for an ample set of practical tools that will help you develop internally rooted security, the foundation of a balanced, interdependent relationship. You'll also learn how to empower your compassion, which will alchemize the soul and transform any relationship. Learn more at lovecoachmariya.com. That's lovecoach, MARIYA.com.